16 and verse 10. Luke chapter 16, verse 10. For the sake of those of you who have never heard this before, I want to make sure that I keep this in context. So I want to start at verse 1, because over the years, especially coming to church, we have the habit of taking the text out of the context and we're only left with the con. So I want to read in context this as you begin to see this and see it very carefully. You ready? All right. Verse 1. And he said also unto his disciples, and Jesus is speaking here, there was a certain rich man. So Jesus is talking about a situation that actually happened. There was a certain rich man which had a steward, and the same was accused unto him that he had wasted his goods. A steward is a manager or someone that oversees the goods and the property of another. This rich man had a steward and had heard that his manager over his property, over his money, over his goods were being mismanaged. And in fact, in verse 2, and he called him and said unto him, how is it that I hear this of thee? Give an account of your stewardship, for thou mayest be no longer a steward. The guy's getting ready to lose his position because he had heard that the guy's been stealing from him. Verse 3, then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For the Lord taketh away from me the stewardship, and I cannot dig, and to beg I'm ashamed. It wasn't that he couldn't dig. He said, I'm not going to. And he says, to beg, I'm ashamed to do that. Well, he should have thought about that before he stole his master's money. Verse 4, I am resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So it's like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do for money? Now, the whole subject here is how the steward handled money. The whole story here is how he could not be trusted any longer to oversee and manage money. That's the subject so far. He says, so what am I going to do about this? Verse 5, so he called every one of his Lord's debtors unto him and said unto the first, how much oweth thou unto my Lord? So now he's calling these guys, that is, the guy he worked for was doing business with, and they owed, his master, and he says, how much do you owe my master? Now, he's still doing something illegal. And so notice what he said. He goes and he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said, all right, you owe 100, take a bill and sit down quickly and write 50. I'm going to do you a favor. Then he said to another, how much you owe thou? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. He said unto him, take a bill and write 80. So his plan was, if I can get to them before my master get to them, I can cut a deal and they can remember, hey man, you cut a deal for me, so when it gets rough, they might help me out. All over money. And the Lord commended the unjust servant because he had done wisely, for the children of this world are in the generation wiser than the children of light. Now, how do you commend somebody that's stealing from you? He said, at least now you understand that money should be used to set your future instead of taking care of your very present. So you got to have the tennis shoes now. And you can save that money, put it somewhere, and it can be used somewhere in your future. But you got to have the purse now. Okay, leave that alone. Verse 9. And Jesus said, and I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of Mammon of unrighteousness, that when you fail, they may receive you into everlasting life. Fail here is translated when you die. He says, if you'll do the right thing with money, then even when you die, you'll meet people that you helped out financially, and they will appreciate what you did for them. So your money not only impacts your present, but it impacts your future and your eternity. Now, here's the part. Verse 10. Now, Jesus now takes what happened, and look at what just happened. We're talking about an unjust steward and how he handled money. Unjust steward and how he dealt with money. And so Jesus comes in, and I guess he's giving us the reason why he shared the parable. And he that is faithful in that which is least, referring to the steward, was the steward faithful with his master's money? Huh? How do you know that? You just read it, right? So he said, if he that is faithful with the least, how many of you know Jesus just called the money the least? He that is faithful in the least. What did he say? He that is faithful in the least is also, he that is faithful in that which is least is also faithful also in the much. And he that is unjust in the least is also is unjust in the much. Now, Jesus just let us in on a principle. If you can be faithful with the least, he says most likely you'll be faithful with the much. He said if you are unjust with the least, then most likely you'll be unjust with the much. Now, we've taken that word least and we're just using it as a principle and forgetting what was the least that was being discussed in the entire context. The least was money. So let's call it what Jesus called it. Jesus said, if you can be faithful with money, if you can be faithful with money, and he calls money the least. It's the least area of faith in the least area where you're going to use your faith in the kingdom of God. If you can be faithful with the least area of the kingdom of God, then you can be faithful with the much healing, deliverance, and all the other things you have in life. But he says if you are unjust with money, then you're going to also be unjust with everything else. In other words, if you hire a guy to work for you, all right, and he can't even be trusted with the money you make at your business, you do not want to make him the vice president of your corporation. Why? He's already proven who he is. You know, somebody says, oh, but Brother Dollar, if I made $20,000 more a year, I would be a giver in church. But I'm not making that much right now. You know what? If you can't give where you are right now, neither will you give if you win the lotto. Because we already know who you are at the least. And that's what's with everything. But here he says specifically, money. You can't be faithful with money. You won't be faithful with ministry. You can't be faithful with money. You're probably not going to be faithful in marriage. If you can't be faithful in money, it seems like it's attached to everything. And it all starts with, can you be trusted with money? Now, hang in here now. If you don't go nowhere, now if you're feeling funny right now, if you're feeling funny, if you're feeling some kind of way right now, you've already felt the evidence of this demonic spirit I'm getting ready to show you. I ain't even showed it to you right now. By pure fact that I'm talking about money, this spirit is attached to it. If somewhere in your mind is come up, oh, Lord, I heard about him. He talking about money. I almost will be willing to guarantee you that that spirit I'm about to show you has been lurking around you and trying to get you to get up right now and just leave. It don't want you to hear what I'm about to say, because this spirit needs servants. Listen to me carefully. So, if what I'm saying in verse 10, if I see it right in verse 10, is he going to say the same thing in the next verse? Look at the next verse, verse 11. If therefore you have not been faithful, that word faithful means trustworthy or trusted. In other words, if you can't be trusted with money, then you're not going to be trusted with the much. In other words, what he's saying is your trust, if your trust can't handle money, then your trust definitely won't be able to handle healing. It takes trust to be healed. It takes trust to be delivered. It takes trust to get all the things that God promised you. But if you can't do nothing with the littlest, if your trust doesn't work with the least, if your trust doesn't work in the area of money, why do you think your trust is going to work in the area of getting healed, getting delivered? That's what he's saying. See, trust is the currency in the kingdom. Money can't. Buy grace. Money can't buy the favor of God, and money can't buy the blessing. The only way you get the blessing, the only way you get favor, the only way you get anything from God is trust. Trust is the currency in the kingdom. But the only way you're going to prove that you trust is based on what you do with the least, money. So he's saying here, if you can trust God in the area of giving and receiving, if you can trust God with the least, money, then most likely you'll be able to trust him with the much, healing, deliverance, relationships, because you can trust him with the least. If you can't lift 5 pounds, most likely you're not going to be able to lift 500 pounds. Why? You can't handle it. And he's saying trust that can't be trusted with money is trust that can't trust God with healing. Now watch carefully. If therefore you have not been faithful or trustworthy in the unrighteous mammon, underline that word mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? Did you see what Jesus did? Jesus just said, if you can't be trusted with unrighteous mammon. Now, mammon came from an Aramaic word, and in most translations, it means riches. So it'll be translated, if you can't be trusted with riches or money, then who will commit to your trust the true riches? So look what he just said. True riches like healing, true riches like deliverance, true riches like favor. If you can't be trusted with money, who? Here's what he said. Who in their right mind is going to put into your hands something when you couldn't even hold this little thing here? You can't even hold the least. Who's going to put into your hands the much? Are you following what I'm saying? All right, now watch this carefully now. We're almost there. And if you have not been faithful or trustworthy in that which is another man's, who will give you that which is your own? Now watch this carefully. No servant can serve 2 masters. Either he will hate the one, love the other, or else he will hold to the one, despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. You can serve God or mammon, but you cannot serve God and mammon. Now we see a different use of the word mammon. Because now in this verse it is saying, no servant can serve 2 masters. One of the masters that you can choose is God. And the Bible says God is a spirit. But the other master you can choose is mammon. But we've never talked about the spirit of mammon. Mammon is a spirit. See, there's a spirit that's going to be on money. Either you choose to allow God's spirit to instruct you with what to do with the money, or you will by default allow the spirit of mammon to govern you where money is concerned. Money is neither good nor bad, ladies and gentlemen. Money, if I put this money on the floor, that money is neither good nor bad. That money is not governed by God or the spirit of mammon. It depends on who picks it up. If you are governed by Mammon, then when you pick this money up, then Mammon will now tell you what to do with it. If you are governed by God, then God will tell you what to do with it. Are you understand what I'm saying? Listen to what I'm saying. Now, I pick this money up. If I pick this money up, and if I have the spirit of Mammon on me, Mammon tells you to do this. Mammon tells you to do this. That's 50. Mammon tells you to do that. God tells you to do this. There go 100. You see the difference? Now keep that in mind. So he's saying, what spirit are you going to subject yourself to when it comes to the lease? What spirit controls you when it comes to money? What spirit have you yielded to when it comes to money? The spirit of Mammon. Now let me give you a biographical sketch or summary of Mammon. Who is this Mammon? Well, Christ warns us right here against Mammon. He says you can't serve both of us. You got to choose one. You got to choose me, or you got to choose that spirit of Mammon. So who are you going to choose? You can't serve both of us. You have to choose one. If you don't choose me, then by default, you have chosen the spirit of Mammon. Mammon was the name of the Syrian god of riches and money. It was also the name of that demon that Milton used. You remember the Paradise Lost? It was also used in that body of work. In the biblical sense, the word Mammon is the spirit which rests upon money. All money has a spirit impacting it, either God's spirit or the spirit of Mammon. Now, like I said before, Mammon wants to produce this attitude. And the attitude that Mammon wants to produce is, man doesn't need God. The spirit of Mammon wants to say, you don't need God. You are self-sufficient. The spirit of Mammon ultimately tries to do this. You don't need God. Trust in riches. Trust in money. Don't trust in God. Now, you can serve Mammon instead of serving God, but it's impossible to serve both at the same time. There is no middle ground. Now, listen to me carefully. Some things about Mammon that I think you need to know about. Number one here, Mammon has some rules. Number one, Mammon is in direct contrast to the Spirit of God. The spirit of Mammon is totally opposite to the Spirit of God. Whatever the Spirit of God will lead you to do where money is concerned, Mammon will lead you to do completely the opposite. Mammon says, buy and keep. God says, sow and reap. Mammon says, cheat and steal. God says, give and receive. You see the difference? Mammon is completely in opposition to where God is concerned. If you ever find yourself in a position where you're doing something you know is wrong just to get the money, the spirit of Mammon is governing your life. It is. I'm going to say it again. Mammon says, buy and keep it. God says, sow and reap it. Mammon says, cheat and steal. God says, give and receive. And it's all dealing with the money, but who is the spirit that's conducting your actions? Mammon is looking for servants. It wants to rule your life, and it wants to take the place of God. It's more than just dealing with money. Mammon wants to rule your life, and it wants to take the place of God. And I'll show you in a moment that a lot of things you have been dealing with and a lot of things you've been suffering through is ultimately this sneaky, crafty spirit of mammon that's been trying to get you as a servant to a point where you're willing to do things you would have never thought about doing before, but the money was on the line. And if it's a great deal of money, you will absolutely throw your character out the drain. It just depends now on how much is on the line. Mammon is looking for servants. Mammon is looking for a congregation. Mammon is looking for a race of people. Anybody that can have an unhealthy relationship with materials. Anybody that can finally get to the point where they say, I don't need God. I got a job. I don't need God. I got money. I don't need God. I'll go and get the highest bidder who's going to pay me the much money. God will call you to a place and say, serve here the rest of your life. But then a business will say, I'll give you a $100,000 raise, and you'll say, I'm sorry, I got to go. Forget God's will. I got to take the money. Don't tell me it doesn't exist. I've seen people who got in my face and said, God called me here. And in a moments of time, if the cash is right, they'll go in a moment. Who's ruling that life? God or Mammon? And then it'll get you to a point where you get used to making a certain amount of money, and now you don't go to church anymore. You try to figure out, well, what happened to that lady who used to be here every Sunday? Oh, she got a gigantic raise. What happened? She doesn't need God anymore. Sundays is picnic time now. She's not coming to church anymore. Why? Because Mammon has just got a servant. And they'll call it the blessing, but then yield to the spirit of Mammon. It wants to rule your life. It wants to rule your life. When you have it, it's not enough. When you don't have it, you're willing to compromise and exploit your own life or anybody. If you got a good friend, but if the price is right, hey, whatever. They got to do what they got to do, and I got to do what I got to do. That demon will separate